There we go. All right. Well, like I've done the last several times, I want to make sure that we are covering some of the.
My earbuds.
All right. I am just going to mute you, Ray. No offense. I want to make sure that we're making our progress through the administrative rules. I know how exciting that is for you guys, but you know, being a principal broker for 17 years, I have had many circumstances where agents come to me after the fact and say, well, how come you never told me that? I'm like, come on, really? So I want to make sure we cover things that so you don't wonder what your responsibilities under your licensure are. So having said all that, hey, Don, are you going to join us for the whole thing, or are you just giving Brandon a back massage or something as he goes through the session? Yeah, very nice.
Thanks, man.
Okay, well, let's jump into it. I'm going to share my screen. Feel free to give me a raise of your hand, not physically, but with the little Zoom emoticon, because that makes your picture move up to the top, and that means I know somebody has a question. So let's get into it. Share screen. The last time that we were covering things, there we go. There's my lovely marked up administrative rules. Anything in green is the positive. These are the things we shall do, right? Not the shall nots. We'll get to those soon enough. But last time we had gone through rules 7 and 8. And so I'm going to rapid fire go through 9 through 13. We'll actually skip 12 because we really don't deal with sub-agency very much, if at all. Okay, so rule number 9 is that upon initial contact with another agent in a transaction, disclose the agency relationship between the licensee and the client. Why do they even put that rule in there? Anyone? Because I'm still scratching my head. I'm not exactly sure. You know, up in rule number 2, it says when you start working as someone's agent, you're to have it in writing. Rule number 9 is if I bump into Brandon and we're going to be doing a deal, one of the first things I need to do is let him know I'm representing my client. That should seem, but I think it's just in the category of trying to avoid problems, right? We're all 1099s. We're all trying to attract new business. And I think they're just put that rule in there to make sure we're not snaking, stealing somebody else's client. So let them know up front, that is in fact my client. Okay. Rule number 10, and this is the one that I love because it really does go back to rule number 2. When you start working as their agent, get their agency in writing. ERS, EBB, something. But then rule 10 is kind of interesting. It says when executing a binding agreement in a sales transaction, AKA a purchase agreement, confirm the prior agency disclosure. That's our section 5, right? So those are the 2 times that the division says you are to positively get in writing your agency relationship. I've heard so many different versions of this over the years. It's like, no, you only need to do it before you, or as you're writing the rep sheet. I'm like, well, then why do they have 2 different rules about it? I mean, it's actually very clear. Van Kage, who's one of the lead investigators, did a thing in the quarterly newsletter about a year ago on this and made it explicitly clear that the way I just told you is in fact the way the division views this. And that is when you start acting as their agent. We've covered this a little bit before, but I want to make sure it's sticking. When do you become someone's agent? Wow, crickets. Brandon, take a stab.
Would you show somebody a house?
Can they normally get into a house that has a super key box on it without your help?
Nope.
Nope. So that's kind of an agent function. If you're giving them advice on the market, is that something they typically confine themselves? Typically? I mean, we're starting to get a little gray. My point is when they're starting to rely on your expertise or the things you're able to bring to the table, including showing homes, there's implied agency. And that's when the division says you really need to have that in writing. Okay. So rule number 10 just confirms that. Rule number 11 just echoes that in the context of a lease or a rental agreement, because our EBB or our ERS says whether it's a purchase or an option or a lease, that is still agency, not just on a buy or a sale. All right. And rule number 12, again, raise your hand if you've done sub-agency in the past year. Okay, whatever, commercial guy. It's very uncommon. It used to be a lot more common when we didn't have the MLS and electronic information, because it was a little more wide open. We had to collaborate more with people in the industry, and therefore sub-agency made a little more sense back then, but it really doesn't get used hardly at all. I haven't seen it in probably a couple of years myself. So, all right, the last one, and here's an interesting one. Rule number 13. So here we are in this day and this age of whether it's dotloop or DocuSign Rooms or SkySlope or whatever our electronic system is for signatures. We think the fact that somebody has signed it, I mean, there's two problems with that. What's problem number one with electronic signatures in your book? Well, what is the number one practical problem?
They don't read it.
Oh, so who said that? Kelly, what'd you say?
They don't read it.
Yeah.
For sure.
And how good are we at agents of saying, hey, before you sign this, make sure you read through it. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me. In reality, most of the times, we go with, I would put it in the loose category of the assumptive close. We send it to them, and if they sign it, oh, well, we just assumed that they read things and knew what they were signing. And it's becoming one of the bigger problems. So I'm going to quickly go into this. The argument is something like this. The Utah courts have held that an adult with capacity, meaning mental capacity, to sign a document is responsible for the things that they sign. That is in fact true, and the courts will uphold that. The problem is the DRE, which isn't beholden to the courts per se, they say for Robert to be a licensee, he has a fiduciary of reasonable care. And under that umbrella of reasonable care, he should be explaining to them what some of the ramifications are. And we're going to get into one of those issues today. So I like the fact that we have rule number 13, which for those who've been in the industry long enough, back in the early 2000s, it was a requirement of the contract that not only did you sign it, but you had to initial that you actually delivered the signed copies back. They did away with that. And so now, if you're smart, you go in and you make sure in your profile in SkySlope or whatever you're using, you say anytime somebody signs this, make sure they get a copy. It's usually a checkbox function that they get a signed PDF back. And therefore, you're jumping the hurdle of rule number 13. So just some good reminders on agency and just good practices when dealing with your clients. I think everybody on this call, for the most part, I can't see everybody who's on the call, but in different trainings that I've done, and maybe have similar mechanisms, but I'm always one to try and not reinvent the wheel each time I deal with a client. And so if I were to show you, I have a folder, I have electronic and paper folder for a buyer or a seller. It has all the key documents. And as you might imagine, seeing what you see on screen, I have key areas highlighted with some comments and, hey, you need to pay attention to this. And that way, anytime I deal with a buyer or a seller, I give them a copy, and I always have a disclaimer. I'm like, the entire document's important, but my experience as an agent are some of the ones that are more commonly need to be paid attention to. So I think if you were ever questioned on your fiduciary of reasonable care, if you sent them that set of documents, and honestly, if you sat down and took the EBB, the buyer due diligence, the so what I'm missing here, the disclosures for fraud and other things, and if you took enough time to just take those into Adobe Acrobat and highlighted those and saved them out, I think you could get them all nice and dialed in, ready to send to any of your clients, probably within an hour or two. And those hour or two that you spend could be used over and over again. So just a little encouragement if you haven't done that already, because it's pretty hard for the Division of Real Estate to say that you didn't exercise a fiduciary of reasonable care when you can document, not only did I meet with them, I sent them a document pointing out many of the important parts of the contract. And then when they signed it, I also send them a signed copy back. That sounds like you're doing a pretty good job. So make sure you have those processes in place. Any questions on those rules? Otherwise, we'll move on. All right. Okay. In this last quarterly newsletter, the division shared some data. How many of you seen this? Kelly, I knew you were going to raise your hand. Okay, Robert. So this is kind of interesting. In the 22 years I've been in the business, I think this is the first time I've seen the Division of Real Estate go out and query the public to see how us as licensees are doing and meeting their needs. And I think it's pretty interesting information. So just real quickly, here was the objectives to see if they, number one, right here, to see if the public had received adequate representation when they purchased or sold a home. Number two, do they believe they had all the information they needed during the process? Number three, did they feel that there were any problems that occurred during the process that could have been avoided by proper information and representation? And the last one, same questions were asked for those who financed their home purchase or refinanced their primary residence. So, you know, as I started looking at these numbers, and let's go through these, right? 62% were first-time home buyers. 62%. 2/3 of our buyers are coming in as first-time home buyers. And I think that number is only going to get worse. What is the number one segment or grouping of people like boomers? What's the number one buyer segment right now? Is it Gen X, Gen Z? Is it millennials? Is it boomers? It's Gen Z by far and away. And they will be the biggest for a long time because Gen Z trails off. The numbers are lower. Okay, so 2/3 are first-time home buyers. 80% use some type of representation in their transaction, which kind of bucks the trend. Nationally, about 92% of the homes that are sold are using a realtor, and that has gone up in the past decade from the high 80s. All right, fourth point, 38%, 39% of the representation represented both buyer and seller. All right. See how good you guys have been paying attention over the past several months. What's the number one and number two litigated items nationally every year as far as real estate transaction? I'll give you the first one. Disclosure. Either seller's disclosures or any other type of disclosures. What's the second one?
Earnest money.
Agency.
There you go, Robert. Earnest money is a big one, but agency is the number two one. And a lot of it has to do with limited agency. There are, last time I checked, there's 9 states that have done away with limited agency. Some of them have an exception. They'll let it happen at the broker level, but it cannot be done at the agent level. And this is something that has picked up some steam here in Utah over the past several years. They're at least eyeballing some type of restriction on limited agency just because it's inherently challenging to maintain your fiduciaries and not abuse those in a limited agency role. Okay. Here's a sad one. 56.3 identified trustworthiness as the number one factor in selecting their representation. I don't know what the other, 43% is. I'm not sure I want to know. Then we go down to 83.6% of the respondents gave representation a 4 out of 5. I think that's pretty good. Certainly a little room for improvement. But here's where I start to get concerned. 70% believe the representation was loyal to them during the transaction. How do you guys read that stat? Are you like me? I'm like, oh, that means over 30% think we're scumbags and didn't protect their information or we weren't loyal to them. And it's kind of interesting that the amount of limited agency, which is 39%, is pretty close to the 30.5% that believe they weren't represented well. I think there might be a correlation there, right? The next to last one, 73.1% believe their representation kept information confidential. How many of you have an experience like this? I'll prime the pump here. I used to love it when I was doing sales and stuff before calling an agent that my client might be interested in their property. Of course, I'd go on the MLS, do my research. One of the first things I'd look at is how long's it been on the market and what was the list date? Because if I knew it was at a 3-month mark or a 6-month mark, there was a high probability that the listing agent was up against their listing expired. And if they did that, and I would throw out something like, hey, Kelly, just tell me what they need. Tell me what they're looking for to get the job done. And oh my gosh, it was like a gold mine. Now, my fiduciaries to my clients, not to their sellers, and you would get stuff that would kind of make your toes curl a little bit because you knew they did not have the seller's permission to share things. So this number doesn't actually surprise me too much. All right. And then the last one, 68.9% believe the representation provided them with reasonable care and diligence. So on the one hand, kind of good numbers, but on the other hand, there's still a big chunk where we're underperforming. So I guess the takeaway from all of that, and there's some nice graphics to kind of show you, they point out, the division points out that in the state of Utah, we're about 6 points higher on satisfaction than the national average. I think we should be double the national average with how well our organizations are run. But anyway, just interesting things to keep in your mind, and hopefully are motivational for you as you go out and build your book of business, because there's a lot of room to outpace your competition, even here in the state of Utah. Okay. All right, time for a trenches story, and it's going to dovetail into one of the things I wanted to discuss today. Who was it? Was you, Brandon, said Earnest Money was the other one that would be a big deal? Yeah, well, nice segue, because that's what I want to talk a little bit about today. So I will not share names to protect the innocent. It is within our company. But I got a call. I got a call a little after 5 o'clock on Friday, and it was from one of our brokers. Said, hey, we've got a problem. And I always love it when it's Friday evening and I'm getting excited about the weekend and it's the Super Bowl weekend, and a broker calls me and says, hey, we got a problem. I'm like, yes. So I said, all right, so, what's going on? And the short version of it was, well, we have a transaction that is supposed to be closing on a multi-million-dollar property. Today, Monday, this was Friday, this coming Monday, it's supposed to close. Earnest money was $20,000. And there was another $500,000 that was supposed to be given to the company at the time of financing and appraisal deadline passing. Just take a guess. How much money did we have of any of those? Yeah. A big fat donut. And you can imagine, I will always talk to my brokers. Yeah, thank you. That's exactly right, Robert. I will always speak more directly with my brokers. I try to temper it when I talk with agents, but I think there was some version of, holy what is the agent thinking? And so you start to get the rest of the story. And I'm gonna give you the particulars that were shared with me, and then I want you to tell me what we do in this situation. So, first of all, the buyer, the agent never met the buyer. It was a lead. Yeah, Kelly.
Did we represent the buyer?
Yes. Yes, we did. That's why I was so excited. So happy. So the agent never met the buyer. It was a realtor.com lead, talked to him. Again, this is a multi-million-dollar transaction. And guy says, yep, I'm interested. Our agent writes up the offer, $20,000 earnest money with $500,000 later. And 8 days, the 4 days come and go, the 8 days come and go. I have to have a conversation with one of my office managers of like, hey, how come this didn't get flagged for me? Right? Because when a contract, just so you guys know on the call, when a contract gets submitted or any document in a transaction gets submitted, anything new goes into a queue called the files to be reviewed. And it's broken down by the office. And so that office manager, they can literally open up their computer in SkySlope on a Monday morning, a Tuesday, a Wednesday, and they'll have a queue of files that need to be reviewed. And one of those things, if you get a REPSI, is like, okay, well then, within 4 days, we should have earnest money. And especially if it's a big chunk of earnest money, let's pay extra attention to that. And so I'm just kind of curious, almost a month later that I'm hearing about this from my broker. Now there might be I'm going to cut some slack. There might be some feasible reason why it happened, but definitely have to have that question answered. All right. So earnest money doesn't show up. And the agent says after the fact, well, we went under contract and this guy, I think he said he had a stroke or something and ended up in the hospital. Okay. And it's the one person buying. It's not a husband and wife. It's not a trust. He's in the hospital with a stroke and is incapacitated. Let's stop there. What do you do? What do you do as the agent?
Notify the other party and your broker.
Yes. Thank you, Robert. You notify your broker and certainly notify the other side. And I would say that's not just a phone call. That is, make sure you have a paper trail. Make sure that resonated with everybody. Always make sure there's a paper trail. Right? It will serve you well. Okay. Well, guess what did not happen?
Either.
Did not notify the other side. And when we pressed the agent on it, he's like, well, I thought the guy was going to get better soon. And rather than rock the boat, we'd just wait till he gets out of the hospital and then everything would be okay. So apparently the guy gets out of the hospital and then he goes AWOL and won't respond. So what do you think the agent does at that point? Does he come clean at that point? No, he's hoping against the odds. He's like, well, I knew I kind of screwed up. And so I just thought, if I could continue to talk to the guy, I would make it better.
Did your agents pass at this time?
Not quite yet. And it was the financing and appraisal. So he continues on, does not notify his local broker, does not notify the principal broker, doesn't notify the office manager. He just lets it continue to go on. And so then we fast forward to Thursday, Friday of last week, and the other side says, hey, we never got confirmation of earnest money received. Wow, that never happens. So I want to stop there for a second. Let me pull this up. Well, actually, I have it highlighted on another screen here. So can you guys see that okay?
Bigger.
Make it bigger. Okay. Is that good? Okay. So this is Katie's Corner from Q1 of 2022. So a year ago. And it's dealing with earnest money. So all the points we were talking about, I'm going to just hit my highlights. Who has the greater responsibility in making sure earnest money is deposited in accordance with a real estate purchase contract? The buyer's agent or the seller's agent? Both. The division does not make a distinction that, because I've heard this from agents and other brokers. Well, it's the buyer's broker's responsibility. And in reality, here's a little trivia fact for you. If you look at our REPSI, the current version we have, nowhere does it say it is to be deposited in the buyer's brokerage. Did you realize that? It just says it's to be deposited in the brokerage trust account. It doesn't say which one. So if you're a listing agent, you have just as much. This was the only saving grace for our agent, right? Certainly he's liable, but the other side waited until 2 days before closing to verify that the earnest money was or was not there. they have just as much of a fiduciary. And so, I don't know what that means. We're both idiots. That makes it somehow better. I don't know. All right. Typically, there are two options. This is if earnest money doesn't show up right here. Typically, there are two options in regards to earnest money. Oh, sorry. You can either deposit it with the brokerage within 4 days, or use the title insurance addendum. And I highlighted this portion. If you're using a title company, this is the DRE, you must use their addendum, right? Because Kelly, you see this from time to time, I'm sure. We still get agents who just write on a blank addendum, earnest money to be held at the XYZ title company. And you know what? It may go through and there's not a hitch, but if that file goes sideways and the division looks at it, this is their direction, their explicit direction. If you're going to have it at a title company, you must use their addendum to cover that situation. Okay, now to the sections in red. As mentioned, yeah, go ahead, Robert.
I know I'm odd.
That's what we love about you.
There's many contracts where I don't get the choice.
Yeah.
So you talking about if we used a state approved form or any contract, because I have contracts that are written by attorneys that we don't get to edit anything.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up. And it's a good reminder, because there is not a commercial real estate designation license within the state of Utah. You're a licensed real estate agent, correct? And a broker. Right?
Right.
So the rules apply to you as well. So the good news is they want you to use their form, but they also always have a carve out that says if an attorney writes the contract, then that will suffice. But they give us this latitude as real estate agents. They say that we have a very broad use of the term of an exception to the practice of law. And the way that is stated is that we can fill in state approved forms or forms written by attorneys, either or, right? And I've had this discussion so many times with agents. They're like, well, they give us the blank addendum so I can put whatever I want in there. The division's very clear about it. Yeah, you better be really careful what you put in that blank addendum, because if it creates any ambiguity, right, just like we would hold an attorney accountable, you'll be held accountable, right? So price change, an extension of a day, those are good things to use a blank addendum for. But sometime on one of these calls, I'm going to bring up, I save some forms that I get over the years that it blows your mind, the forms that you see. I had one agent at a previous brokerage that literally wrote 2.5 pages typed of all kinds of different forms and made it sound like an attorney, or at least he thought it did. And it was just so bad. And I was just like, Kevin, oops, well, I won't tell you his last name. Kevin, you can't do that shit. You just can't do that. So circling back to your point, Robert, if you have a form written by an attorney that says, hey, earnest money is to be held at this title company, that does give you a carve out for this provision. Okay. But an agent just writing into a blank addendum saying, XYZ title company to hold the earnest money, yeah, they'll frown upon that heavily. All right, in the red, as mentioned earlier, both buyer's agent and seller's agent have a duty to their clients to make sure earnest money has been received. And that implies by the deadlines. If the buyer's agent has not provided confirmation that the earnest money has been delivered, because I get this, right? Because I'm going to split hairs here. If we do our job as the buyer's brokerage and we get the earnest money on time, have we lived up to our fiduciary? Yeah, we have. There's nothing in the contract that says, and I'm not advocating for this, I'm just saying there's nothing in the contract that says that we have to proactively notify the other side. I had a broker the other day who said, well, you guys screwed up. You did not provide us confirmation of earnest money. And I had to go right back to this article and be like, did you happen to read Van Kage's article, a year ago on this? Because it says you're just as responsible to find out. And there actually is no explicit requirement that I'm to notify you. on the other hand, you have an obligation to find out if we have it. Now, good business practice, of course, we're going to try and send out that we have a confirmation. But if push comes to shove, don't sit there and try and put this on me. You have just as much responsibility, right? Okay. The second paragraph, it's unfortunate and an unusual situation where buyer's earnest money check has been deposited and returned for deficient funds. That happens, right? Just an oversight. I was going to transfer money from my 401k or whatever, and the timing didn't work out, or I forgot, or whatever. It happens, right? The buyer's agent should promptly notify their client first and the seller's agent that the earnest money check has been returned and determine whether an addendum should be prepared to address this issue and attempt to resolve the failure to provide earnest money funds as originally contracted. It is essential that the seller's agent be promptly notified of the earnest money deposit breach. So that is the biggest takeaway from all of this discussion. So since they use the term promptly, I'm just curious what you guys think prompt means.
Soon as you know.
First chance or first reasonable chance.
Yeah, you use the key word, Robert, reasonable. First reasonable. That doesn't mean, well, it's reasonable. I was on vacation, so I wanted to wait till I got back. That's not what reasonable means. It means, what would a normal, ordinary, prudent agent in that situation be expected to do, right? It doesn't mean I have to drop everything I'm doing and pick up the phone. But if I got notified, if Kelly called me and said, hey, you know, we've got a check that bounced, I'd be like, we need to notify that other side today. You know, I think within 24 hours is reasonable. Nobody can really claim that they've been harmed too much in a 24-hour window. But if you go beyond that, then I think we're opening ourselves up. So I know you're all dying to hear what happened with this transaction, right? Yeah, well, it's still going on as we speak. The buyer, thank goodness. I mean, part of my conversation with the broker was, well, let's hope, let's hope against hope. And this guy gets out of the hospital and still wants to buy the property. Otherwise, our agent really could be on the hook, right? Remember this, in litigation, I mean, I've heard people say this, well, it's between buyer and seller. Yeah, but we rope ourselves into the transaction when we become the overseer of funds, right? And it says that in the first paragraph of the REPC, we're going to get that earnest money. And if we don't do our job with that, we now have one of the two pillars of litigation, which is liability, right? And then all that remains is for somebody to say there are damages. And what would damages be in a situation like this? Norm, what would damages be like in a situation like this? Well, I mean, how could a seller even claim that they've been damaged?
I have an idea.
Oops, is Norm still there?
There we go.
There we go.
Did you ask what I wanted for dinner? I can't remember the question.
If earnest money wasn't provided, in this case, $20,000, and it's clear that the agent had culpability in this and responsibility and did not uphold their fiduciary of reasonable care, how come the other side, what would the damages be? What could they claim as damages, I guess is my question.
Time off the market.
Time off the market, okay.
Right, which could affect the new price, the way that there could be a number of things in that order. So
Yeah.
it could be detrimental.
For sure. And all they need is a good attorney to connect the dots. Robert, you're going to say something?
Yeah, it was 2006. Last cycle we saw this, and there was a big push with NAR after some of these lawsuits that to help us understand and clean it up, that is a biggie. What if you just had a 10% market drop in price in a 3-month period or something crazy, and they lost that window of opportunity?
Let me show you how easy this is. So if I'm a seller and I had a cash buyer that was $10,000 under the offer I accepted, and then everything I explained happened and the deal didn't transpire and the market is downturned, and oh, by the way, it's the cold months of the year now, and I had to sell it for a $40,000 loss, right? Are those damages? Are those real? Can I connect those dots? Oh yeah. And oh, by the way, if that happens, and then we go into the provisions of Section 17, you also get my attorney's fees. And pretty soon, anybody who's done the litigation route, it takes half of a heartbeat to get to $100,000, right? And so I guess this is a little bit of scared straight. I mean, we're all good actors, but just as a reminder, man, it is just so much easier to document along the way, right? Let's go back to the situation. Yeah, go ahead, Robert.
I was just going to say that I just had this happen to me in a transaction, too. And I had to go back and look because I couldn't believe it. I was looking and going, where the heck is the earnest money? And I went back through my emails and my text messages. I had 6 text messages within a 2-week period asking for the receipt to be sent over, and then 2 emails. And each time, oh, I'm out and about, I'll do that as soon as I get in my office, and never sent me confirmation. So I was just going to say, our obligation never goes away. We got to keep trying.
Yeah. Well, and here's another thing. I think there's more effective ways to do things, right? And so in a situation like this, specifically with earnest money, first thing agent should have done is what? We all know this. He should have just notified the other side. And all of a sudden, he's out of the risk game. It's not his fault at that point. It's his clients for not providing the money. But when you hide it, you're now part of the risk game and the liability game and the lawsuit game, right? So a simple, and this is why I say make sure it's a paper trail. Don't do a phone call. Text is okay. I would prefer an email. And when it's something of significance, always include their broker. Always include their broker, because a typo in an email, that sends to the wrong address, or, oh, that's an email address I don't use anymore, or all kinds of lame excuses. Ultimately, that contract is the broker's. And so it's entirely appropriate to notify the broker. And that way, the broker's going to see it and he's going to talk to the agent. And now we know everybody's talking about it, right? The other point I wanted to drive home, hopefully it registered with you today, is it's not just the buyer's agent's responsibility. It's yours as the seller's agent just as much. As far as the DRE is concerned, and oh, by the way, if it goes to litigation and I'm an attorney, I'm going to point right to the rules of licensure and be like, hey, you guys are trying to point the finger at us. You have just as much liability. And that's the only saving grace in this debacle that we're dealing with, and hopefully resolves nicely today, because the update is the buyer was supposed to get out of the hospital today and was going to go and wire funds, and they will be closing on it tomorrow. So fingers crossed, we dodge a bullet. The agent gets a multi-million-dollar transaction closed and gets paid out on that versus, getting caught up in a rather nasty, financially problematic situation. So I like sharing real stories, and I won't obviously say the name, but it just makes it real for us. And you realize, oh, this is just one of my peers who, he's a good agent. He really is pretty smart. And I'm telling you, I've had probably, I don't keep a tab, but I would say I get these probably at least once or twice a month where it's a good agent who calls me up and is like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I'm a better agent than this. I forgot this. I didn't do this. And you know what? I agree. It's just sometimes we mess up. So we always need reminders. Okay. There was two other things that I wanted to show to you today. So let me get rid of this on my screen. I wanted to show you something that you may not be aware of. Oh, by the way, did you guys see this announcement from the MLS? Have you used this, Robert? I'm just going to show you on screen. this is just a demonstration of you walking through the house and taking pictures, and it will take that and transform it into literally a floor plan. Pretty cool technology. And this is going to be yet another thing that we're getting. Apparently there's an upsell to it if you want more features, but you'll have a pretty good basic functionality as a subscriber to utahrealestate.com. So glad that they're always looking for additional things to make our life easier and better. I'll just warn you on one thing. So years ago, my wife and I, we represented this guy, name's Pete, Pete and Pilar, ended up doing 6 different transactions with him over like a 10-year period. Great people. And Pete is one of the humblest guys I know. And in fact, we bought him this really nice house up in Eagle Rock, kind of an exclusive neighborhood out in Mapleton. And after a year and a half, 2 years, he says, Matt, I need you guys to sell this. I'm like, Pete, this is like your dream home. This is fantastic. He's like, it's too ostentatious. He's like a devoted, born again Christian guy. And he's like, it just makes me feel bad that I'm like kind of like flaunting that I've done well in life. And he gives to so many different entities to help other people out. But when we went to sell his house, you know, what's the one that everybody's been using for years that does this?
Sorry.
That does the layout of your house, does like
Matterport.
Thank you, Kelly.
That's
Matterport. And so I'm like, I'll totally pay for this. You know, it's great. It's going to showcase your house. And he's just like, no. And I'm like, Pete, I'm paying for this. He's like, I don't want people to know where my kids are. I don't want them to know where my safe is. I don't want to know, you know. He had an interesting point. So I think if you're going to do something, don't just surprise your clients with this. Make sure you double check with them first. They may not want the details of the layout of their house put on something that is searchable by a good portion of the public. So,
Matt, are you experienced with this? Do you know if it's accurate enough? Because I see measurements and everything.
Yeah. So actually, Ashley Wolfius, I think, is the one that gave us a heads up on this a couple months ago. And it was in conjunction with some of the lenders are almost even bypassing the appraisers now because they can send out the agent. And this was part of the discussion. It's like, I don't want to be in that risk game. I don't want to be the one responsible. All of our documentation currently gives us the ability to get out of that risk game by saying, oh, it was another appraiser, it was county records, it was the owner. When we start saying, well, I took the measurements, makes me a little nervous. So we'll have to have some type of a disclaimer on that if we're going to do it. But my understanding, Daryl, is it's actually, I was talking to Brad Belke about it, and he said it's pretty dang accurate. It's kind of scary.
Cool.
Okay, that's not what I was going to. I was going to show you this, maybe. Okay, you guys all know I'm a stat guy. And these are the stat tools that we get on utahrealestate.com, right? And they're pretty good. I only typically go into about 5 or 6 of them. But one that I have really been utilizing a lot lately is this daily snapshot report, okay? So I'm going to pull this up, and what it does is it allows you to look at a particular day, in this case, February 13th, this year versus last year. And you can see, oh my gosh, yeah, we had 2,000 actives last year on this date, and now we have 7,000. Under contracts, we were at 7,000, and we're now at 4,500. So that's cool, and that's helpful information. But I just want to show you something that's really kind of cool. If we go here and we say, I just want to look at under contracts. And rather than doing a date, if I go into a range and say, show me since January 6th to February 13th this year versus last year. And if I update the report, hopefully it won't take forever because sometimes it does. Give me a second. There it is. Okay. Now I'm not seeing everybody going, ooh, ah, so that's disappointing to me. But you can do this. I mean, I've done a whole year. And if I were to back this up and just say, let's actually go back to October 1st. And here's a little glitch. I notice when I do that, it updates this date. So you have to go back to current date. just a little glitch they have in their system. And hopefully this won't take too long. But yeah, I mean, it kind of shows you cool trends of what is going on, what has been going on with under contracts, right?
It's interesting how it virtually mirrors it, just at a different level.
Well, yeah. I mean, there's a little bit of an anomaly, but the drop, makes sense with the end of the year. We always know that seasonality, and it starts to pick up. But notice, we're not picking up as much as we did. I mean, it's not a huge difference, right? But to your point, Daryl, if I took this back, I could, with reasonable expectation, again, at a different level, I could almost prognosticate where we're going to be in the next 2 months based on last year's data.
That's my next question. Can you extend out the last year line, even though the this year line won't give you the next 90 days or so?
Yeah, let's have some fun. Let's see if it'll do it. I'm going to do for March.
As long as you're in there, it saves me trying it.
That's a good chunk of data, but it's weird. Once you go past 1 year, then you kind of get overlapping lines. But yeah, look at that. That's kind of cool data. So I look at this and I'm like, okay, so if I was going out to talk with a seller about selling their property and pricing, I'd be like, hey, listen, the best indicator is how many we have under contract. And here's where we were a year ago, right? We were at 7,000 at this time of year. We're at 4,500 now. That means there's almost 50% less buyers, right? And so we need to make sure your pricing is spot on. It just seeds the conversations that we always have as agents, on price reductions, but it gives you some data and now kind of a visual that just about any seller could be like, yeah, the market's different now, right? So
what if you went out to May of 2023?
It will not go out beyond the current date.
That was my question.
So I would have to go back to like January of 2022, and you could get the whole year and get an idea where it's heading.
I get it.
So yeah, kind of cool stuff. And I could just say, you know what, I'm not interested in under contracts. I want to do it with actives, and I could generate the same data, right? So that's just one of your benefits for being on the call. Now you are way more geek savvy than others.
Cool.
All right. Last thing, I just wanted to, what time is it? Wow. Okay. Well, we have like 5 minutes. I'm just kind of curious, as I go around the different offices, I hear the different conversations, and sometimes I'm in on those conversations, and it seems predominantly that everybody says some version of this right now, which is, oh yeah, it's great. The market has turned. I was here in 2008 and, killed it because, all the weak realtors who really didn't belong in the business were gone. And I'm like, that's cool. And I totally agree with that. But my follow-on question that I ask agents, and so I'm going to ask you, and it is kind of rhetorical, but I don't mind some feedback on it, is how are you currently approaching your buyers and sellers? Now that the market has changed, and let me just vet that out a little bit. Now that interest rates are double what they were a year ago, or close to double, and inventory is higher, and pricing hasn't really come back yet. So with that as a backdrop, what's your pitch right now to a buyer or a seller? Anybody? Dan, you're never shy. Come on.
Golly, it's kind of both sides, right? There's two sides of that coin.
Yeah.
Right now, I think that the inventory is so low that, geez, wouldn't it be nice to be a seller in this market? Because you're going to have a lot of eyeballs on your property. Having said that, it's also, there might be a reason why there's so few homes on the market. Buyers.
Hey, but Dan, I'm going to interrupt you. So I'm looking at inventory, and a year ago, 2022, there's under 2,000. We now have 7,000 homes. So that should be like a positive, right? That we have more inventory.
Well, yeah, compared to what, right? So, compared to 4 months ago, we're lower compared to a year ago. We're way higher. I think this really has, it deserves a full-throated conversation. And, part of what I'm telling people is the amount of homes that are active in our market that are new construction outsizes what is typical. And so the reality of, like, if you have an existing home, if you're to like take out new construction market, like our inventory numbers are super low. Yeah. And so, compared to what I think is the real question. So if I'm talking to a seller, that's part of what I'm talking to. I think what I've found is over the last 6 weeks, buyers and sellers have found an equilibrium. They found a place where, like, people are willing to transact. Part of it is sellers have come down in pricing. The other part of it is that interest rates have come down to where buyers can now afford, the prices that sellers actually want for their homes. So, yeah, I mean, that somewhere in there is my full conversation I'm having with people.
Yeah, and I think that's an honest assessment, right? I think that our occupation is really kind of interesting, right? Because on the one hand, of course, we want to get sales done. That's how we make our livelihood. But I also want to make that money based on being a net positive to my clients, right? They're better off for having interacted with me, the information I provide, the protection that I provide. And so with that as a backdrop, when I look at this, I'm not trying to exhibit gamesmanship and, how can I spin the numbers? Can I honestly go to a buyer? And this is what I want you to consider for yourselves. Can I go to a buyer right now and say, this is a great time to buy? Think about that. And Kelly, I love that you're nodding your head, because I tend to agree, because it's all relative. Is it a good time to buy compared to 2 years ago? No, of course not. But we don't live in the past. We live in the present and what's coming, right? And Dan and I have had this discussion, and a couple of others have had this discussion. When you understand that the new construction inventory of our total inventory is about 35 to some, it depends on the market, 40% of our inventory right now. So of that 7,000, 3,000, 3,500 of those are new construction. And the unique thing about those is a good chunk of those are deals that have fallen through, that the builders are trying to get off their books now. And what are they not doing right now, Dan?
They're not rebuilding, right? They're not replacing those.
Go ask most of your builders. Now, there may be an odd exception here and there, but if you ask most of the builders that you interact with them, say, how much entitlement are you doing right now? How many subdivisions are you trying to push through, through a municipality to get them lined up so you can start, putting concrete in the ground and start building? The answer, in my experience, and I've got connections with quite a few, is we're not doing anything. We have to get our inventory off the books.
I think Robert's got an answer to that, because I saw his hand go up, but I just want to make one comment.
Yeah.
I have 2 clients that have called me in the last 3 days and have asked pretty much that. And is it a good time to buy or sell? And yeah, it absolutely is, because you just told me you've got 2 kids, 1 extra bedroom, and a 3rd one on the way. It's a good time to sell. And if you need to sell now, we have the ability to figure out how to help you get that done. Yeah, you bought your house back from me back in 2019. You've now got $180,000 in equity that you can take with you sideways to make sure that you can find what you can afford and what will help meet your needs. Then just map it out. Most agents, it's a little more complicated than it used to be. Most agents struggle with it. Then and I'll tell you the second one. The second one called me just this morning. In fact, it was a text message. Said, my husband has this aortic condition. He's 83 years old. We don't have our house paid for. We need to sell it so I can buy something cash. So when he goes, I have a place to live, because his retirement ends. People have situations in their lives, guys, and there's always a good reason to buy and sell.
Well, and thank you, Daryl, for that reminder. And it is so true, right? And this is why you hear all the time, good market, bad market. It makes our market, our industry fluctuate, but people will always buy and sell property because it's a function of life, just like you described. But here's what I want to make sure we're equipped to say. Here's just a couple of snippets, just as reminders. My first house was at 8.7%. 8.7%. And I thought I was getting a bargain because my parents had 14% in California.
Yeah, but it was only $14,000.
Yeah. My first house, brand new construction, 2,500 foot on a quarter acre, was 101,000. 101,000. Anyway, so now you got me thinking about my old house. Oh, so the point here is, the market will over time always go up. So from an investment standpoint, there's very few things that people can do unless they're in the know and some insider trading that will outpace the leveraged investment of real estate. That's item number one. The interest rate becomes less significant when you look at it that way. So make sure people see that rather than getting target fixation on interest rate. Second thing is, just like we explained, right now, and for the next 3 to 6 months, you're going to have a decent level of inventory. But when the builders are done moving their excess property, there's nothing to backfill, which means the inventory level is going to drop. The demand is still high. Interest rates will be a little bit better, which is going to make a rush on the market, which means pricing is going to go up again. So can I honestly say it's a great time for a buyer to buy? Hell yes, I can. And my style is just to be direct with people like that. And it works for some, it doesn't work for others. They're like, you guys all catastrophic. I'm just like, no, I'm just trying to tell you, let's go while the getting's good. And the fact that interest rates are going to come back, most lenders are having some form of, hey, if you buy now, we have some reduced cost to refi, if not, what do they call it? No cost refi. There's always a little bit of a cost. And then the last thing is with those builders, and I've heard multiple builders say it from their mouths, is whether we have a preferred lender or a preferred title, when we haven't done things in the past, haven't done closing costs, haven't bought down right, everything is on the table right now. So your pricing's down. You can refi a little bit later. A lot of the builders will even buy down the rate right now. And you will do it in the next 6 months, and you'll look back a year from now going like most people do, like, man, I'm glad I got into real estate when I did, right? Because the market always trends up over time. Sellers. What's the number one complaint from sellers about selling in this market?
Their neighbor did better 6 months ago.
Your neighbor did better. And how do you address that one, Kelly?
You buy and sell in the same market is generally my answer.
Yeah.
Regardless.
No,
Yeah.
you just empathize because there's nothing you can do. Like, hey, that shit failed, buddy.
Yeah.
The horses left the barn.
Some version of that, right? Yeah, you stayed in the casino too long. You thought you were still playing on house money, and the game has changed. The good news is it's still pretty good getting, right? It's not going to be as good as that, but you don't want to be another 6 months down the road and be in a tougher situation, right? So let's get the best deal we can get done right now, right? And of course, if they're doing the move down, much like you were describing, Daryl, this is the time. So any move downs, it's a no-brainer, right? And then I think the last thing to tell them is don't just surrender like the rest of the market. Don't be sheeple and just reduce on price, right? Offer out that you'll buy down the rate. It's almost always a cheaper proposition than just taking a straight cut on price. And it qualifies more buyers by doing so. So these are just a few of the snippets. I hope you have these spinning around in your head or having them, discussions. This is a good market. It's going to get better, but it's also going to get challenging towards the end of this year, just because of inventory issues. So go spin that as positively as you can and be the trusted advisor to help them see the light so they do the right thing. Okay. Thank you all for being on the call. You're a good bunch. Thanks for putting up with my moving the time, but Utah Realtor Day at the Hill. What are you going to do? All right, guys, have a great one. We'll talk to you soon.